want to earn more? Work less and enjoy what you do each day. It's no secret, it can be done. This podcast with Dr. T will not only educate and inspire you, it will also teach you how to do more and be more with the time you already have. It will be like a shot of adrenaline straight into the heart of your business. Here is your host, Tyson Franklin.
Hi, I'm Tyson Franklin, and welcome to this week's episode of It's No Secret with Dr. T. With me today, I have royalty. She is known as the podcasting queen. She's also an award-winning podcast host and producer, business and personal brand strategist. And today we're going to be talking about going from invisible to influential and profitable. Welcome, put your ears together for Annemarie Cross. Annemarie, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Such an honour to be on your show today.
This is going to be fun. I'm looking forward to, because I know there's a lot of people out there who are invisible. Yet they've got so much information in their head. They've got so many key things that they can share with people, but they don't know how to get out there and let people know about it.
Yes, that's so true. You know, one of the things that I often find, and I think we spoke about this on my podcast when you were a guest, and I think it's so important because it's something that comes up over and over again for women particularly, but you mentioned for men too. This is the imposter syndrome. When what we do is we often compare what we know and what we're doing and where we're at in our career and our business, look at what other people are doing and think, well, how can I ever go up against that? They're far more progressed in their business and so forth. So we end up not saying anything. But one of the most important things to remember is that we may be operating or providing expertise in an area that other people are speaking into as well. However, the journey that you have lived through, the challenges that you've overcome, the lessons you've learned, the insights, as well as your own story, journey, and your experience, you know, who you are as an individual is going to speak specifically into the life of your ideal client because you are the person they want to learn it from, hear it from. So by not sharing your message means that people who are waiting for you to share your message, they're going to remain stuck.
That is a really, really good point. And I know we spoke about it on your show, but it was something that that didn't really click to me, that we actually, I think you touched on something a little bit different there, where you may have two people that have reached the same level of success, or you might even feel that your success isn't quite the same as somebody else, but your journey of getting to that point is completely different. So the person who's got more success than you, somebody could listen to them and go, I can't relate to growing up in a mansion where both my parents were orthopedic surgeons and I went to a private school and went skiing to Aspen every year. Mm-hmm. And now they're a successful business person, but they can relate to the person who grew up on the wrong side of the tracks, struggled through school, and all of a sudden clicked onto something and became a success.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, so true. I'm working with someone at the moment who is technically blind, and she wasn't born blind, yet through, I believe, an illness, if I'm correct. And so when you look at her character, her personality, she's developed a real strength, a real resilience. And I use a branding with archetypes tool to be able to identify someone's unique, their primary archetype and their influencing archetype. And that experience will come through in her podcast, but also comes through in the message that she creates. So her story, weaving that in to her podcast and the work that she does, it's like a hero's journey because she's very much comes from the power quadrant, the hero, the standing up, the resilience. So it's like, if you had a dream, if you had a goal for years, in fact, you haven't even expressed it, maybe to even your closest friends. Well, I've walked this journey and I know what it takes and what you're struggling with. So that's a whole different story working with women or whoever it is that she wants to work with than someone else who's talking about resilience and who's talking about, achieving goals. Whole different story, but people will be able to relate to her because maybe they're, a similar journey. So you can see how she brings a unique aspect to a podcast or to however she's going to share her message and get that out there.
No, that makes perfect sense. So you help a lot of people who are in like service-based businesses who are hiding in the shadows, and you help them discover the message that they've got within them and how they should use that message to create a podcast or just become more visible themselves as a podcast host or a guest or both.
All of those, because many people will have that message and they want to get out there. So whether they're speaking face to face or whether they're at a stage where they want to now take their message and share that on a podcast, we'll be able to support them in either that way. But you have to have that story, that unique aspect of you and what you offer. And that's an area that I love, because once you understand that, because how often do we take for granted the things that we've gone through, or we may be ashamed of them, yet when we look at them, the reason we are who we are today is exactly because of what we've gone through and what we struggled through. And by telling that story in a way that inspires and empowers others and influences others to say, you know what, yeah, if she can do it or he can do that, so can I. And I want to follow that person because of who they are and how they show up. So yeah, what's that unique story? What's that unique angle? And how can you bring that forward in a way that can influence, others?
Yeah, and I think what you said then about some people can be embarrassed about maybe some of the things that have happened in their life, maybe some of the things they've actually done themselves that could have verged on the side of being illegal. And they're sort of thinking, oh, I can't really tell that story. But sometimes those stories are what makes the person that they are. And I think as long as what they did not hurt people, then I think it's all free and open. Like I've been on podcasts and they've asked me about my first ever business idea.
Yes.
And the first one I ever had was I used to know a lot of, I went to a school that probably wasn't the best school in the world. And there were people at that school who used to do a lot of shoplifting. And I knew these other people who couldn't afford to pay full price for certain items. And I went, well, if I can put these two people together, be the person in between and make a cut, I could make some really good money here. And I'm thinking, why has nobody ever thought of this before? And I made a killing for about a year until my parents found out. And then I found out that what I was doing was illegal. But
I like that entrepreneurship thinking, that entrepreneurial thinking.
Yeah.
Recognizing a need, supporting, connecting people. I was speaking to someone not so long ago. This was someone from the US, and he'd been, and no real fault of his own, but circumstances had led him to the point where he had to close down his business. And, in that instance, and my background is in personal branding, and a term that one of my mentors used to use quite frequently was digital dirt. And this is information that unfortunately doesn't portray you or your business dealings in the right way. And you know what? We hear things all the time where maybe a customer wasn't happy. It's how you respond to that that is going to make the difference. And so the advice that I gave to this gentleman was, you now have a wealth of insights through that. If you were to do it again, I'm sure you would make better decisions, and you may not have gone down a certain path had you known what the industry was going to do and that you would end up having to close your business and get a fine and so forth. I said, but now looking back to that, I'm sure you're never going to make the mistake again. There are insights that you can share because you can now foresee certain things. And I said, if you talk about that and, lead from that rather than keep it silent, because people are going to find out those things and people are going to be talking about you whether you know it or not, or whether you like it or not. Why not take ownership of that conversation and bring it out in the areas of good? How are you contributing learning? There's always going to be people who are going to speak negatively about you, but I think if you continue to bring an empowering message, that how would you do things differently and so on, and continue to add value, that is when people are going to be able to see that because you're transparent.
Yeah.
And you're out there sharing, that message.
And I think anybody that's been in business, whether you've been in the health industry or any business, you're always going to get complaints. And I believe every single complaint, there's some basis of truth in it in their eyes. Doesn't necessarily mean that in your eyes that they are correct, and there may be a different reasons for something to have happened, but it starts on some form of base. And I think every complaint is an opportunity to basically learn. So when you're working with people, somebody comes to you and they say, okay, I'm feeling really, really invisible at the moment. When I walk down the street, all people see is a hat. The rest of me are like the invisible man. How do I go? What's the first step to go from being invisible to influential? What's the first thing you tell them to do?
Well, in the system that I use, I call this my signature system. There's a number of key steps. And the first is all about insight. And that is information that involves who is your ideal client or who is the person that you want to serve and support. When you understand that, then the message that you share is going to speak into the issue and the problem that they were struggling with. Now, I know that you deal in the medical industry, and there's an example that I'll often give. It was something that I heard decades ago through one of my mentors. And that was when a dentist was graduating from school. Again, this was in the US because a lot of my mentors had been from the US.
Yeah.
But he said, you know what, I'm going to specialise, and I'm going to specialise in paediatric dentistry. And he did. And what he did was he worked with real difficult cases. And it didn't take long for him to start to get a name amongst his peers. And before long, he was getting referrals from his peers that he had gone to, uni with and so forth, recommending that, their most difficult patients go and see him. And it wasn't long before he got a name across the country. He was, referred to by his fellow peers and others, and parents were flying across the country to see him with their children. Now, he niched. There were many other dentists, but he niched in a certain area. And I think a lot of business owners are scared to niche because they're fearful that it's going to limit their opportunities. But when you start to speak into one particular area, you'll find that your reputation will precede itself because of the quality work that you're doing, the feedback that you're getting. And let's face it, when you've helped someone, if you've worked with a client or a patient and they've got incredible results, they're not going to keep that secret. They're going to be talking about it to everybody.
That's true.
Similarly, if you give a bad experience, but then, they become your ambassadors. So understanding who is your unique client, your niche, and can you specialize in a certain area? Insights around, we spoke about, I've just touched on already, what is your unique story? Who are you? What experience are you going to create? You might be a similar, dentist, again, maybe a pediatric dentist, but the way you engage with your patients, you might have humor, or, your team has humor and fun. So immediately you walk into your practice, your clients or patients can get that sense. What's that uniqueness? And so these are just a number of things that we really look at, insight. What's unique about you? What's your story, your message, your brand? A lot of clients that I work with coaches and consultants. So they are sharing their expertise, and I help them develop the steps and the systems that they have to take their client from where they're struggling to where they want to be, and document that IP into what I call a signature system. That's not a term that I coined, but rather something that's very important. You can sub-brand that signature system.
Yeah.
At the moment, I'm working with someone who is very much in the money industry, which has had a real hit with this whole commission thing going on. So she's had to really be mindful about the stories that she's continuing to share, but has to position herself from some of the industry that is really getting a bit of a backlash at the moment. And so we're looking at what's your system, how can you position yourself and share that story so that people can see that, hey, you're not one of these other shonky financial planners or whoever it is that's gone up, against the commission. So looking at that story, that angle, that signature system, and then packaging it up in a way that when you start to share and talk about the outcomes and the values or the value that your ideal client is going to achieve, they pretty much go, all right, heard enough, let's talk, I want to work with you. And when you start to do that, and I always say speak to an audience of one, because when you do, that audience is going to share your content, their results, and the impact that you're going to make will continue to grow. So it's all around getting that insight.
That is brilliant advice. And that message about really niching down and knowing who your ideal audience is,
Yes.
it's funny that that message, probably the last 12 months, I've heard that message more than I've ever heard it before. That people are actually, and the funny part is, so many people just don't do it. They want to be everything to everybody, and they end up being nothing to nobody.
Yeah.
Because they're so beige.
Yes, because they're, and here's a couple of reasons, I think. Number one, it takes a level of confidence and clarity. I think clarity comes first. Because when you know who you are, your message, and I'll call this your signature brand. I call it your inner brilliance. When you know
Is this clarity in who you are, or clarity in who your audience is, or both?
both,
Yeah.
both. Because if you don't know who your ideal audience member is, you can't speak to her. Like when I'm speaking to my ideal client, if I'm doing a live or a podcast on my own, I imagine that I'm sitting across the table from her. I know what she's struggling with. I know the words that she is saying to herself. You know, I know the dreams, the passion that she has, because I've lived that journey where, you know, and I've gone through that, and I know, you know, intimately that those aspects, and I bring that through the conversation. Also, too, often when we don't have clarity about ourselves, again, you talked about being beige, and it can be scary to step up and step out because of tall poppy syndrome, of critics. And then, look, there are going to be people that criticize you, but guess what? Who cares? Because if we allow other people's conversations and critiques to get in the way of us sharing our message, again, think of your ideal client who is struggling, and you're not out there sharing that message. And so I think when we give ourselves permission to be who we are and we capture that and we understand it, there's a level of confidence that shines through. And it's not one of arrogance, but rather of confidence. And you know when you're in the you know, the presence of someone who has that inner confidence, you just trust them. There's a level of know, like, and trust that's instantly beginning to be built and grown when someone has that level of confidence. It's like when you go to a doctor or a physician or a specialist in the medical industry, when they know what they're talking about and they're talking with confidence, it's like, okay, let's do it. You know, I'm sure we've all had those experiences.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to especially doctors and specialists, so if you need knee surgery, you're playing sport, or you're doing something, buggerizing around, and you injure your knee. Now, the first thing you're thinking of is, I want the best orthopedic surgeon working on my knee, especially if you need to get back on the field or it's affecting your lifestyle. So you'll ask around, who is the best knee surgeon? And I'll go and see this Dr. Thingo over here, Dr. Spock. All he does is knees. He just specializes in knee. He doesn't do everything else, just knees. And all of a sudden you will start searching out the person who is the best in that area because they've really focused in one particular area. And then they know that there's people out there who want the best, or the person that's got the most experience in that area. So, yeah, that is fantastic advice.
Yes. Yeah, and it's important because as a service provider, whether you're in the medical industry or you're a coach and you're sharing information that you've learned in your IP, you've specialized. So you know all of the pitfalls and all of, I won't say shortcuts, but you know the steps that you need to take to get a solid outcome because you've lived it, you've breathed it, and you've had all of the scenarios or many of the scenarios that I think you possibly could have, in comparison to someone who doesn't, and who is a generalist. I want to go to a specialist. You know, if I'm working with someone, like at the moment, I'm working with someone who specializes in Google AdWords and Facebook marketing. I don't want just a digital marketer. Not that there's anything wrong with that.
Yeah.
But there comes a time where you go, you know what, I want to see a specialist. And as a change maker and as an aspiring thought leader who wants to be seen as that go-to person in your industry, when you go with that mindset and says, everything that I do, I want to ensure that it continues to position me as that go-to person, then everything that you do will add value, to the conversation, to what people are saying. And often I think when businesses don't do that, it takes them harder to get to where they want to be because their voice and their message is spread too thin and too far, and they're not really being seen as that expert and go-to person.
And I think it saves them time in two areas. One, it saves them time and money in their marketing because they know exactly who they're targeting. Yes. But it also saves them time in their own life on what they decide to study and research. So if, say, for example, the orthopedic surgeon, we'll just use them because everyone knows who they are. If they specialize in just in knee surgery and that's all they ever want to do now is just knee surgery, how good can they get and how much knowledge can they have if their focus is 100% on knee surgery and all the new techniques and the things that everybody is doing around the world? In comparison, if they did surgery on every part of the body and they've got to keep up to date with all the individual parts,
Yes.
they won't be as skillful. And therefore, when they're skilled in that one area, they can also charge a premium because they know they're better than everybody else.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, just say, for instance, that orthopedic surgeon decided they wanted to do some storytelling and contribute to the conversation and decided, you know what, I want to start a podcast or do a dedicated podcast series. Now, imagine they shared some of their expertise, but knowing holistically that a patient is going to need aftercare, even, pre-surgery, what are things that need to happen to ensure that that surgery goes well and that the patient's recovery is far quicker. There may be key people, experts that can contribute to that conversation. So you're now networking and building this great content that involves other stakeholders that contribute to the holistic patient care. But guess what? You've now built that connection with people, or you may already have them as part of your referral network, but you're featuring them. And it's so dedicated that if someone has been told by, maybe their GP, you're going to have surgery on that because I can see that it's going to get worse. And you've got a podcast series that speaks into that. Guess who that listener, that potential patient is going to ask to get a referral to.
Yeah.
Because you've already built know, like, and trust with them, and they can see who you are and just the experience that you create. They trust you. And I think gone are the days now in any industry where we get a name and we just trust them immediately. People are starting to become far more discerning from all industries. We want to know, who is this person? What's their background? And that know, like, and trust is really important. And I think every single potential thought leader and expert needs to recognize that, relationship building, what content can I share that enables part of that relationship building, prior to someone coming to see me and also after. Because if you've continued to provide that high quality service that's enabled a great outcome, even if it does involve other people as part of that relationship, guess who they're going to rave about? You, because you've been a core contributor to that. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And I think it's important. I think we'll stay on with the orthopedic surgeon, is even if the orthopedic surgeon did a podcast, it's not something that he's going to get 10,000 people listening to that podcast every week, because he is niching down what he does as well. And there's only going to be a certain amount of people that will want to listen to it. So the lady who's a hairdresser may not tune into the orthopedic knee podcast, but a lot of general practitioners and physiotherapists and podiatrists probably would listen to it. So yes. It's not about having a massive
audience. How many operations, seriously, can an orthopedic surgeon do? Can they do 10,000 operations in a week? No. But you're absolutely right. And that's another thing that I often say to people is stop focusing on numbers. Stop focusing on, can I get into new and noteworthy? I mean, that's great to have, but you want to have quality audience where you've got quality content that, speaks into that niche, and you're consistent in speaking, that on-brand message, and you get it into the hands of the right people, and you will, because you've specialized in that area. Then your ideal client, you then create a steady flow of referrals and inquiries because you've got this great content that continues to be shared and listened to by your ideal client.
Yeah, and I like what you said too about when somebody, say the orthopedic surgeon or whatever service business, and they start telling stories about before the surgery and after the surgery. I had a guest that was on, Matt Hannon, on episode 21, and we were talking about micro storytelling. And he was talking about how using photographs and pictures and social media and that type of thing to tell a story about who you are without actually saying, hey, look, this is who I am. You let the story and the images and the information you're sharing over a period of time give the big picture of who you are. And that goes back to the know, like, and trust.
Yeah. Something that you mentioned there that reminded me, I don't want to share this, you need to be, we talked about audience. Who is your ideal audience that's listening to? And for someone in the medical profession or any profession that's also looking at developing relationships with potential referral partners, you need to be mindful if you're creating a podcast or any piece of content that if your audience can also be prospective customers, that the terminology that you use is going to be understood by both parties. So from a medical perspective, and I've also spoken to some accountants or people in the financial industry, beware of the acronyms, beware of the body parts. You need to personalize it to think, not only as a potential stakeholder, a referral partner going to listen to this, but also maybe a potential client. So whether you try and mirror that or marry that, integrate that into a podcast episode, or you might do a specific series that just focuses on that particular audience member. Maybe this is going to be someone more as a referral partner. I can use some more medical terminology because they're going to be able to understand that. You incorporate that into a podcast series that was specifically for clients, they're going to switch off.
Yeah.
And run to the hills kind of thing. So
you got to
Yeah.
speak their language. What you're talking about is speaking the language of the listener. And that relates to anyone that's in the service industry, and they're, say for podiatry, for example, you're talking to a patient and you can't start rattling off the names of particular muscles, tendons, attachments onto the bone, the subtalar joint. And the patients will sit there going, I have no idea.
I just came to you to see about your feet.
Yeah, I'm just here to see about my feet. I didn't need an anatomy lesson. But if you're talking to other podiatrists, you can start using the correct terminology because they speak the same language as you. So I think that's a really important point. Like I said, whether it's a podcast or whether I've read some blog articles that I read it and I go, have you written this blog for the people that are the same profession as you? Say a podiatrist, are you writing this for another podiatrist to read, or are you writing it for the patient?
Yes.
And too often they write it for the podiatrist because they think, I don't want to come across that I look silly. And it's not about looking silly. It's about providing the information in a language that's understood.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And it's so key. So niching's fantastic, but also when you're sharing your message, no matter what medium you're using, make sure you keep in mind who is this for and tailor it to suit. And make sure that they're aware, of that, so someone doesn't kind of read that. And you might have on your website, for potential patients or potential referral partners, and have all of the content there so that's easily accessible and clearly understood.
Okay, so if people want to get hold of you, Annemarie, where do they find you? And what's the name? And make sure that you tell them the name of your podcast.
I have a number, but Ambitious Entrepreneur Show is a podcast that you came on.
I was.
The best way to connect with me, I'm on LinkedIn, Annemarie Cross. You can search for me there, or the website that is specifically focused on podcasting is podcastingwithpurpose.com. That's podcastingwithpurpose.com.
That's cool. I just thought it was good to get that out now. Not that I've ever forgotten to ask somebody how they get hold of them, but sometimes I think it's good to just bring it in a little bit earlier in the conversation. So if people have got to a certain point, they go, I've arrived at work now, and they're getting out of their car, they'll miss it, but now they haven't.
Yes.
So what other tip have you got for somebody about helping them be less invisible and more influential and profitable?
Well, I think we covered insight. That's really important. And then the next step is all about intrigue. And what I talk about in the intrigue covers some of the things that we've spoken about today. To become intriguing, you need to speak the language of your ideal audience member. We've spoken whether it is someone else in the medical profession or someone who's a potential client or patient. And also, what is the outcome of this particular episode or particular piece of content? Because when we're building intrigue, and that is building something that is of real value that not only captures the attention of a listener or a reader or a viewer if you're doing videos, but it maintains their attention and they're easily able to understand what it is that you're saying. So much so that when you get to the end of that piece of content, whatever call to action that you have, your ideal client is more likely then to take that action. And I think so often as business owners, we think about, got to get the message out there, got to do that, got to speak to my ideal client. Yep, got that, got my niche. And then they forget, well, what's the actual outcome you want of this particular content? What's the call to action? Call us, here's a number, speak to so-and-so, sign up, here's a document or some other little resource that I've created to help you take your learning to the next level. What is that call to action? Mention that. And then once you know that the content that you're sharing and the message and the voice that you're using is really making an impact. And again, how can you tell that? People are engaging with your content. I've been waiting for someone to speak into that. then just continue to do that over and over. You know, sometimes we often reinvent the wheel, and that can sometimes, stop that intrigue from building. But consistency is so very important. And the next step is integrate. You know, we're all busy. We don't have time to be across all social media platforms, podcasts and videos and everything else that we're told by marketers that we need to do. But, we don't need to do that. What are some key aspects that you're communicating and connecting with your ideal clients and referral partners? What's already working well? Can you then integrate, because that's the next step, a podcast or a video series, whatever it is, into what's working really well to be able to continue to nurture those relationships? And I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. And then further get more business. Now, I was speaking to an accounting firm, and one of the things that they were struggling with was allowing their existing customers to know about all of the other services that they provided. They said, Annemarie, we have got so much expertise in the staff and consultants that we have in our business, but a lot of our clients who are in the trade industry come to see us once a year to do their annual tax return. So they think of us more as a tax and compliance business.
Yeah.
But we can help them with succession planning and profitability and so forth. But we don't want to bombard them with, to buy our services. I said, well, what about looking at creating a podcast series which speaks in, and anyone can use this no matter what industry that you're in. Create a podcast series that speaks into the challenges and the problems and the conversations that your ideal client is already talking about around, the boardroom table. Share some case studies about clients that you've worked with and how they've overcome those challenges. Give them some step-by-step, give them some real value, and then say the call to action. If this is what you're struggling with, book in for an appointment, or the next time you see your consultant, let them know so that we can make a separate appointment to talk about that. Then once you've got that content, it's 24/7, 364 days a year content, 5 days a year content that is going to be relevant. What ways are you already using in your business that's connecting with your existing clients? The newsletter was working really well. Some of the social media platforms, leverage off them to let those connections know, hey, we've created a podcast. This might be something that you're struggling with. And then from there, you can leverage that audience through using an integrated approach. But make sure that everything that you are doing is connected to another. A video series might point to an article. The article points to the podcast series. From there, hey, come and join us on Facebook. Or, when you use an integrated approach, those touch points, which we know are so important from a marketing perspective, people are going to engage. They're going to come in from different aspects from your website and how you're communicating, and all of that content and the different modalities that you're using is going to build that know, like, and trust. But integrate. What are you doing already that's working well, and can you leverage that even further? Do that consistently, and you will become influential. That's important.
I like the advice, and I've seen businesses that don't do that, where they're so disjointed. They'll have a Facebook page that they post occasionally, but their logo or the images they're using on the Facebook page, it looks nothing like their actual business. And then they've got their business and it's painted a completely different color, and the color that they're using has nothing to do with any other marketing that they're doing. And then they might be talking about, say, professionalism and expertise, but then they'll shoot a video and it looks like it was shot in a cave. The sound is bad, the lighting's bad. The person talking looks like someone's holding a gun on them. It looks like one of those terrorist videos. Yeah, and they've got signs held up and they're saying that they're agreeing with what they're doing. And it's so disjointed. So they're better to do less and do it better, but just make sure everything integrates. Stop trying to do too much.
Yeah, and I like what you're saying there. Make sure that the way that you are communicating your message is, firstly, started off with an area of strength. So if you're not comfortable with a video, don't do videos because it's going to come through. Use a medium that you can communicate well and leverage that and start to build, real impact in that way. And then you can look at, expanding. I talk about, brand communication wheel. And so often we stretch ourselves too thin and nothing works. And that's, so important to consider. But you need to also have, and this is where we're talking about not having something integrated. What is that final call to action? What is that one action? And we've got to consider that if we look at a buyer's journey, And I break that down into 3 stages. There's the awareness stage, the consideration stage, and the decision stage on the buyer's journey. Now, everyone's journey as a purchaser is different. Some of us need more information, need time to research and so forth. In some instances, if we've got a medical issue, we need to make the decision like yesterday because it's more of an emergency. But in that awareness stage, people are doing their research. They're looking for recommendations. They're finding podcasts and articles and so forth. But what's that call to action that you can then invite that new listener to develop even closer relationship with you? And that's where I talk about, your thought leadership podcast series, where you then invite them to sign up to a series that you've dedicated because you know that what they're struggling with, these are the questions and concerns and issues that they're going to be faced with. So if you help them overcome that through a podcast series, and the way to access that podcast series is through giving their name and contact details, you're now able to nurture that relationship through that buyer's journey. So this is the decision stage, the consideration stage. But then if that call to action at the end of that, say that thought leader podcast series is give us a call, then they're more likely to want to speak with you. And from there, you can enroll them or you can sign them up, depending obviously on what industry that you're in. And that's the decision stage. Sometimes the decision is no, and that's okay, because there's so much business opportunities in this world. But if you get that consistent message right and you're speaking into the needs and desires and challenges of your ideal client, they'll put their hand up. And if they're ready and you've got that good sales process that follows that through, they'll say yes when they're ready to make that decision.
What you're saying there about they can get in touch with you about your podcast series, you're saying not every podcast series has to be up on iTunes and anything like that. You could have it on a private part of your website that people could go there and just download. It doesn't need to be a series that you put together that's open access to the world. You can keep it private for a membership group, particular clients, particular referral sources. That's very detailed information, but it's only for the selected few that you want them to listen to it.
Yes, absolutely. It's interesting, the strategy that we're using for a lot of our change makers and aspiring thought leaders is a 3-part podcast series. But what we're also doing is we're keeping the individual episodes open, because each episode is dedicated to a specific topic. But at the end of that podcast episode, we're alluding to the fact that this is part of a 3-part series, and that we're encouraging them to listen to all 3 if they haven't already. And to do that, we're sending them to one, we call it a squeeze page. And that's where it's a web page which shares sparse information about the series and how people can access that. But we're also including other resources. A lot of my clients have created a questionnaire, almost like, or a checklist, something else that can again provide real value to that listener. And so that whole package, 3-part podcast series, which is also transcribed along with some resources, checklists, or even a quiz, is something that's so enticing. People can't help but get access to that. And it's so valuable that at the end of going through, consuming that content, they've been so blown away that they go, you know what, I can't think of going anywhere else, because they built that relationship with you. And so you've got 3 individual episodes with consistently being, generating new listenership in the case of the podcast series, but it's all funneling back. It's all sending people back to that access that one complete podcast series. Does that make sense?
It does. That does make sense. I've got one final question for you,
yes,
because we're coming to an end. It's Monday morning. Somebody bumps into you and they say, Annemarie, I heard you on my favourite podcast, It's No Secret, Dr. T, and I'm about to go into work. I loved what you said. What's the number one tip you would give me when my bum hits the chair, I'm sitting at my desk? What should I do? Where should I get started? Just kick me off.
I'm going to share a mindset tip which takes us right back to what I opened the show up with, is who would want to listen to my story? And this is something that I've shared on a number of different podcasts. And it was something that I experienced when I listened to one of my guests who, from a young child, was abused, right from people that should have been protecting her as a teenager. She was gang raped twice, left dead on the side of the road. Anyway, thankfully, she was able to get support and healing through that journey. But it wasn't until adulthood that some of her close friends continued to encourage her, you need to share that message. You need to share that message. And this is my tip. Don't eliminate yourself or remain invisible thinking your story is not worth sharing, because this is what my guest did. And it wasn't until ongoing prompts by her closest friends that said, you need to tell the story. She thought, you know what, to shut them up, I'm going to share my story. So she shared her story in a group of women who were in, a home for women, domestic violence and so forth. And at the end of her presentation, not a dry eye was in that room. One of the ladies standing in queue was crying, inconsolably. And when my guest spoke to her finally, because she was right at the end of the queue and waited really patiently, my guest said to her, it's okay, you're going to be okay. And she said, you don't realise. She said, I made a decision that my life was too painful, too hard, and I made a decision to end it. But as I was driving, something guided me to come and listen to you speak. She said, and after hearing you, I've made another decision that I'm worth it, that, I can get support as well. And so that decision is to get help and that my life is worthy. So I've made a decision to live. Now imagine if my guest had not shared her story. She may not have had the impact for that one person, that one woman who'd, thought that her life was not worthwhile. So if you think that your story is not worth sharing, it is, because it may just save someone's life.
That's true. And I've had feedback from people, from a comment, whether it's been from a guest or a comment I've made on a podcast, and I've had emails sent to me that have said, what you said on this particular episode has saved my marriage, has saved my business, has given me a new lease on life, has made me decide to stay in the career that I'm in, has made me change careers. So it's amazing the power that our words have. And even if people aren't coming up and saying it to you, if one person says it to you, there's 10 who are thinking of it but are too shy to come up and say something. So I think it's really important to get our message out there, let people know what thoughts are going on ahead, share our experiences, good and bad, and hopefully it helps people. So Annemarie, I want to thank you for coming on It's No Secret with Dr. T. This has been fun. As always, I always learn stuff from my guests. So sometimes I feel really, really selfish that I get more out of this than anybody else. But no, thank you.
You're so welcome. And thanks once again. It's been an honour to have spent the last little while with you today.
Well, there you have it. If you want to go from invisible to influential, it comes down to really telling people about your story and sharing your story. And even though sometimes we may feel like we're an imposter and our story isn't worth telling, you need to get it out there, because there's certain people who are sitting around at the moment who need to hear your story, and your story will be the thing that will actually make them make the change in their life. And it doesn't matter how you share it, whether you share it in written format, it might be video format, or whether you use podcasting. I just think it's something that you need to get out there. Before I go, just a reminder that if you're enjoying the podcast, please tell your friends and family about it. A review on iTunes would be awesome, and it would put a huge smile on my face. And if you're a podiatrist, make sure you go over and listen to the Podiatry Legends podcast. And even if you're not a podiatrist, I think you'll enjoy some of the stories that are actually told over there. Okay, that's it for me. Look after yourself, look after your family, and I will talk to you again next week. Bye for now.